is an inspiring panel as well, and as you see, they are already discussing on their own, but we are going to bring them to the conversation with you today. I'm not going to talk very much because we want to catch up on time and give you all a chance to interact and to discuss. We know for the participant list that all of you are experts on your own field, so we want to hear from you. But let me perhaps refer to the International Labour Conference that is happening right now in Geneva. It's the most important meeting perhaps of course for the ILO, but also for the constituents of the ILO, the tripartite groups from workers, from employers, and from governments, talking together about things that can make the future of work a better one, and can impact also in peace, security, and in progress. That is what we all want. ADB has celebrated the 50 years anniversary. ILO will be 100 in 2019. I think we're with you on that. But the centenary celebrations in ILO are also around four themes, or what we call centenary conversations. And one of them is decent jobs for all. So we leave no one behind. We dignify the jobs. We make the jobs as important as they are for the lives of each of us. And just yesterday, ILO Director General Guy Ryder said in the occasion of the World Environment Day that a greener future will not be decent by definition, it will be by design. And that, I think, is an important message, because the work that we do as knowledge workers, as designers of different pieces of the future, can include the decent work, and therefore it's our responsibility, each of us, to design the future, and perhaps with this in mind. Let me just go to the panel now, and I am going to give the panelists an opportunity to do some opening remarks with some questions that I have prepared for them. And after that, we will revert to you for any question that you want to pass to the panel. And as you know, in the afternoon, it will be, not in the afternoon, sorry, after the coffee break, that will be very brief. We will have some working groups where your expertise will be fundamental for the design that we are going to do from now on. So, Senator Legarda, the Philippines is making enormous progress in economic growth. Is it doing as well in relation to the clean energy transition? And what strategies your government is putting in place to facilitate a transition that is also just and leaves no one behind? I know that you have this at your heart, and we are looking forward also to see what are the biggest challenges for you in your important position.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good morning to all of you. And it's good that we're starting the 4 or 5 day conference with this very important meeting on a transition to clean energy. And I'm glad that it's being connected with good and decent jobs, because we clearly see that the transition to a low carbon economy to make our communities healthy, safer, and more resilient is directly connected to the well-being of our people, whether it is the creation of more jobs or the health of our people and our communities, of our women and children and the elderly, or even the availability of livelihoods. All environmental laws you can think of are already present in the Philippines. And I'm proud to say that in my 3 terms in the Senate for almost 20 years, I have authored these laws. Let me state them. The Clean Air Act of 1999, the Clean Water Act of 2003, the Ecological Solid Waste Management Law, where you segregate garbage at source, recycle, and compost, of 2001, the Renewable Energy Law of 2008, the Climate Change Act, which created the Commission on Climate Change of 2009. It's a mandatory law, the People's Survival Fund of 2011. The National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Law of 2011. The Environmental Education Awareness Act. So you see, I can go on and on. All the policies are in place. The challenge for the Philippines is for our agencies and bureaus and departments to be able to effectively and implement all these important laws. Now, recently we passed the Green Jobs Act. That's very important because it incentivizes those in green and sustainable energy endeavors. Now, whether it is in renewable energy, in the construction of wind farms, solar power plants, or even in biomass or hydropower, this generates jobs compared to coal-fired power plants or diesel plants, which are not just destructive to the environment, but also has adverse impacts on the community and on health. Now, even in other areas which may not be directly connected to energy, but provide a haven for a clean environment, like segregation of waste at source, recycling, and composting. You may say, this is not connected to clean energy. But if we actually segregate waste, and we follow RA 9003, you're able to provide green jobs as well, so that you don't live beside a mound of garbage or an open dump, which is outlawed by now. My office, together with the Ombudsman, has been proactive in the implementation of Republic Act 9003, where no less than 50 local governments have already been sued, but filed cases by the Environmental Ombudsman for the lack of compliance to RA 9003. But of course, that's a different story altogether. Let's go back to the Asia Clean Energy Forum. The laws are in place, and I hope that we could see a more proactive stand of our government itself to seize the opportunity of helping promote clean energy in our transition to such. But then again, it is important that it should be private sector led. Being a legislator of 3 terms and being the chairman of the Finance Committee, where I provide the funding and assistance to the whole government, it is important that we see the private sector following the laws that we have set in place in government and to provide the initiatives there, and livelihoods and decent jobs will follow. And I can see that there is not a lack of it. In the private sector alone, solar is what I'm more familiar with. There's more than 800 megawatts of solar energy in the Philippines, in fact, way beyond the 500 megawatts subscription under the feed-in tariff in March of last year, meaning that there were more investments than there were accommodated under the Philippines feed-in tariff program. But even without the feed-in tariff, which is 8.69 as of last year, investments must be made because we see that there is already, almost at least, great parity between renewables and fossil fuel. So my take on this is, why should the Philippine government or even the private sector fund or encourage or even accept investments in fossil fuel, be it bunker, diesel, coal, or whichever, on long-term contracts, 5, 10, 20, 25 years, of a resource that is dirty, that is imported, and therefore dependent on fluctuations of foreign currency, especially now as we speak, when Gulf states are closing their borders to each other because of allegations of support to terrorism. You say, what has it got to do with clean energy? Because if we use imported fuel, and we are dependent on imported fuel from the Gulf states, that would affect the foreign currency difference for the Philippine peso. The wind is free, why not use it? The sun is there. Why not harness it? We're an archipelago of more than 822 coastal municipalities, of at least 64 coastal provinces in 81 of total 81 provinces. And so we must harness the sun, the wind, biomass, hydro, and this will generate jobs in the grassroots, in the local communities, of course respecting the rights of indigenous people and protecting the rights and safety of our workers. So back to your question, what have I done as a legislator to promote clean and green energy and a clean and sustainable environment and clean, decent jobs? Well, I think in the past almost 20 years, actually 98, so that's 19 years being a senator in my 3 terms, the enactment of the 8 environmental laws that I mentioned, and also one of the most important things, since I chaired the Committee on Finance, it's my second year chairing the finance, never will you see in the history of our country, and I'm proud to say that, such a green budget, where general provisions and special provisions in our General Appropriations Act are geared towards clean, resilient communities. What do I mean? Even the stock taking and the inventory and database of biodiversity in state universities and colleges is mandated by my law on the budget. And I micromanage everything, even the construction, let's say, of farm-to-market roads must be attuned to resilience. It's not, first we are carbon tagging, climate tagging, all expenditures through the Department of Budget and Management, but that's not enough. And I would like to also see the standards of their climate tagging, because they may say it's a flood control infrastructure, but it may not be done well, so it may not be a right climate tag expenditure. So apart from climate tagging, our expenditures, general and special provisions are indicated in our General Appropriations Act. For example, the planting of mangroves in all coastal barangays all over the country. I don't have to preach to the choir. All of you here are environmentalists, I suppose, and know the basic information about mangroves. Number one, not to cut, but second, to plant more, because they are the most natural buffer against storm surge. Yolanda hit, and people did not quite understand what storm surge meant. Mangrove areas in other barangays were not as hardly hit because they were full of mangroves. So if you plant mangroves, and it's indicated in my General Appropriations Act, which is the most important piece of legislation for Congress. Another is the planting of coconut palms in the triangular method, which makes it a natural buffer against strong winds. We don't have to build too much on cement, and we can actually use these elements which we are blessed with in our country to have natural buffers against strong winds and against storm surge. Now, back to the transition to a low carbon economy. I've also mandated the stock taking of government public infrastructure on the utilization of energy. I also have a pending measure on the energy efficiency bill so that we don't overuse or uselessly utilize lights, the mere taking off of our switches and plugs before we leave our homes and offices could save us so much in terms of energy conservation. If you just do an audit of all our buildings, even the ADB, first I assume this should be LED. Number two, LED. Number two, when you think about the design, do you actually need all these dozens of lights? Will we be able to see without these lights? Even in the construction of homes and buildings, is it not better to have windows so we use the natural sun rays instead of having lights? In terms of our air conditioner, good, it's warm. That means, do we actually put it in a room temperature 25 degrees so that there's thermostat, so you don't use it too much? I always tried it in the Senate because we freeze in the Senate with below 20 degrees, and when you actually can put it to 25 degrees. So does the ADB actually have a rainwater collector so that and the water that goes on its roof is actually being used in the rainwater collector so that to clean cars owned by ADB or have a little garden there, which you have, is rainwater being used, or do we actually use Manila water, which is chlorinated, which doesn't make sense because the plants would rather have rainwater. So these are simple, very basic, everyday to-do things. But then again, back to your question. The transition to clean energy should be private sector driven. We've already laid the policies in place. What we need to do in government is to facilitate a simpler, faster, more efficient processing of permits, of land conversion, if it's on land, of clarity in terms of requirements for investments and for the facilitation of all of these until its completion. I know I'm speaking too long. On the last note, there is a challenge for the Philippines to provide clean power to our sitios, to our small islands, to people who don't have access to electricity. And I hope that the way forward is not by providing them diesel gensets. It is unconscionable to be charging our poor people and local municipalities in rural areas 15 pesos per kilowatt hour when there is half the price of solar with battery. Because cooperatives, some, not all, and distribution utilities would prefer dirty, expensive fuel. And I ask the question, why? That's a question that's an answer. I have the answer. I cannot say it in this form. Why do they prefer dirty, expensive fuel, bunker or diesel, that they are used to, and would enter into long contracts disadvantageous to the poor people, rather than something cleaner, more resilient, and less expensive? I leave you with that question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. As you can see, the Philippines is leading actually in the environmental regulations, and particularly, I think it's the only country that has the Green Jobs Act so far.
It's a new law.
That's right. But let me now go to Priyanta, that I think you need to leave for another meeting. Priyanta, ADB is leading multilateral banks in investments and accountability for climate change. Can financial facilities for clean energy influence responsive investment for a just transition in the private sector, just linking with what the Senator was proposing? And what are the constraints? And by the way, you might like to respond to Senator issues regarding the lighting.
I will.
And the rain.
Thank you very much, Cristina, for that very important question from the viewpoint of financial support. To start off with the last question, that is regarding the lighting. You're right. I mean, this is one of the challenges we have when it comes to clean energy, because the technology improves so quickly, and we may not be able to change our investments as quickly as we would like. For instance, probably the CFLs were the fashion or the most energy efficient one maybe a few years ago. Now it's LED. Then from investment viewpoint, it's very difficult for us to make our minds to just replace all these with another investment. So that's something which we have to really think of when it comes to in a transition. So the technology advances and the benefits multiplies, but each of these technologies need new and new investments. So it's difficult. It's kind of a chicken and egg situation we sometimes have to live with. As far as the financing side is concerned, looking from multilateral banks viewpoint, as you know, institutions like ADB, we provide a lot of financing, particularly in the energy sector, as I said in my opening remarks. We usually lend roughly about 20 to 25% of our overall lending is in the energy sector, out of which more than half goes to clean energy sector. That means energy efficiency and renewable energy. In fact, this is not a lot, but it's quite substantial when it comes to medium and smaller developing member countries. But it's not a lot with considering overall energy sector investments in the world or in the Asia Pacific itself. But in these countries where we have our own operations, as I said, it can be significant. We leverage a lot of other funds from co-financiers, from the private sector, from the government itself. In a way, when we provide this money, the funds, we can always link that to certain covenants and conditions. We do that. When it comes to safeguards, we always do it. Environmental and social safeguards, we always have our covenants to ensure that they follow ADB environmental and safeguard policies, and which includes so many things relating to protection of the environment and of course when it comes to social aspects, protection of poor labor standards, and all these things will come if you look at our loan agreements. You see all these things in it. When it comes to job creation and capacity building related to clean energy sector, whether it's just energy transition or not, in a way, at least in principle, we can include all this in our interventions, because unless these the right policies are followed, we can basically hold back our interventions. So that can be done. We have done so in the past when it comes to safeguards. So that's one way to influence, in a way, the just transition, to ensure that the transition is just or not just an energy transition. That's where I think we can come in, and also when it comes to capacity building. As I said, it's not just preaching these things. What is important to this government? We need to make sure that they have enough funds, enough resources to bring that transition. And in that sense, I think our education sector investment can play a major role. And we are now looking at collaboration between, for instance, energy and transport sectors with the education sector to address these requirements. And in fact, we might have a small intervention of this nature in Bangladesh, for instance, to see how we can bring in education sector investments in line with what we require in the clean energy sector, and see how we can influence this transition. So we are in a position to do that. May not be very effective immediately, but in the long term, medium and long term, we will be able to do it.
Following up on both interventions from Madam Senator Priyanta, Mr. Dupont, I could change the question and ask you if your government can match the Filipino government, but I leave it up to you to answer. I have another question that I wanted to ask you, and is related to your long career in the world of energy and many successful projects and initiatives that you have led. What initiatives do you think have been more effective in promoting clean energy transition that takes also into account the decent or the quality of the jobs, or what are the lessons that perhaps you would like to share with us?
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here today. The short answer, and I'll come back to it, is policy and regulation, privatization to encourage investment, and then that investment creates jobs. But I'm going to do a little history of the ADB building here. This ADB building was designed by Skidmore, Owen, Merrill, and it won an Architecture Design Award for energy efficiency. And when a number of my former colleagues came here in the early 1990s, about 1993, it was about 13 years before they started the Clean Energy Program. They were looking at demand-side management, and our team did an energy audit and with people here at ADB, and they reduced the electricity use by 40% in an energy award-winning building. over 4 years. I still have the charts for that. That was between 1997 and 2001. Fast forward, and as you walk through, you're right, the temperature here is actually perfect for people who aren't wearing suits and ties. As you walk through the building, you notice the daylighting. It's wonderful, and they don't use too many lights in the hallways. Now, one of the problems here is, I mean, the good thing here is that these are CFLs, but they don't dim. So, Priyanka, you should actually change them to LEDs, and then they could dim properly. So, just a suggestion. I wanted to...
Or even just have 2 switches for maybe alternate, so when it's dark.
We can help you.
So I'm going to briefly... So as one of the energy, I mean, I'm in awe of all the work that you have done in the Philippines, and USAID has played a modest role in supporting some of this and renewable energy. But I just want to talk about, okay, jobs and clean energy. So globally, there's about 8.3 million jobs, and IRENA has, International Renewable Energy Agency, has done an excellent report on this. 3.6 million of them are in China, and 1.2 million are in the EU. And about 800,000 are in the US, which is about the same as in Brazil. Okay, so and when we talk about US jobs, there's been a lot of discussion about US jobs recently in energy. There's about 6.4 million jobs, and about half of them are clean energy, and that's going to increase. It's only going to increase. So let's see here. We have coal. There's about 160,000 total jobs. Solar is more than twice that, 375,000 jobs. Wind, about 100,000 jobs. And there's 2 million jobs in energy efficiency. Okay, and this has been going on. This is retrofitting houses. This is making efficient appliances and things like that. So this is fertile ground. So the lessons, briefly, that USAID has is having worked. We do a couple of things very well. One of the things we don't do well in the jobs area is tracking impacts, and we've been looking at that recently. I have a couple of examples to share with you. But for example, privatization of the market here in the Philippines has been very important for clean energy. The Renewable Energy Act that the Senator mentioned. So USAID provided support on this, and the Philippines is very advanced compared to other countries in the region. This is a prerequisite for more investment. And so if you look at the amount of investment and some examples of what we have done and can do well, for example, in Mexico, we've worked, as in the Philippines, to liberalize their energy market. And now U.S. companies are exporting $2.5 billion in power generation equipment. Much of that, most of it is renewable energy. That was just in 2015. And we also provided direct support for energy auctions in Mexico. And that is a very interesting topic in this energy transition, because we're moving away from feed-in tariffs to energy auctions. And there's a deep dive workshop right down the hallway talking about energy auction experience from around the world. We're trying to bring that to Southeast Asia. The energy auctions in Mexico mobilized $6 billion of investment from companies. Okay, so then we also at USAID do work where there's something we call the missing middle. There's not a good enough pipeline for the investment. You have investors looking to invest in clean energy. We mobilized $1.2 billion through the Private Financing Advisory Network. So what I can't tell you exactly is, like, all these things we've done, how many jobs. That's why I'm here, actually. Get some ideas from you and say that we are interested, especially in this climate where we need to justify our programs are providing jobs for Americans and for others as we grow the sector. I love the word, not just a transition, a just transition. So we actually have created many jobs. I wish I could tell you how many. It's a byproduct of the work we've been doing. And I think this is a really interesting area that I'm interested in discussing with you, ILO, and also with ADP and others.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think Peter touching a very important issue, that is the fact that the jobs are growing in this area, and it seems to be going to grow even more, no matter what, because the private sector is already being mobilizing. And by saying that, let me welcome Mr. Cao from Blockchain Technology. And Mr. Cow, blockchain technology is taking the market as a storm. Does everybody knows what is blockchain? Because I didn't know until very recently, so I say this with very humble. So maybe you can explain a little bit what is that, and what is next after blockchain. I'm just learning what it is, and now it's moving again. So this is difficult for us to, maybe on policy or in other areas, to catch up with what this very advanced people is doing. And by the way, address us a little bit which type of careers young people, maybe part of our families, can look at if they want to work in the area that you are.
Thank you, Cristina. Firstly, blockchain actually is a very new technology and very young. For example, before the year 2008, there's no blockchain. And after the year 2008, there is a paper called P2P, a peer-to-peer cryptocurrency mechanism or network, which was written by anonymous people called Satoshi Nakamoto. It is an anonymous name. And after the year 2013, that there are a lot of cryptocurrency appear in different countries. For example, some Ethereum and the Litecoin. And before the year 2013, there only one kind of cryptocurrency, and actually this is the most important cryptocurrency called Bitcoin. And anyone know about or some actually investing in Bitcoin? Please raise your hand. One, okay, just one, two. And I think that we must think seriously about what cryptocurrency is, and to embrace the new change of the finance market. Actually, the first thing I suggest everyone to do is to buy one Bitcoin or some certain share of Bitcoin or other kind of important cryptocurrency to know to embrace a new change of the finance industry. And let's go back to the question. Blockchain has another name called distributed ledger. It means that it's kind of when it's distributed, it's a new structure of database. It's distributed, not centralized. Normally, all of those database structures are centralized. Even some kind of database are distributed into different IDCs or different servers, but the owner, the operator, and the manager of the database is centralized. So mostly some kind of IT companies or internet companies, for example, Google, Amazon, or Alibaba in China. But in the blockchain area, in the blockchain field, all those data will be distributed into every local, every individuals, every companies alongside the whole value chains. And it means that every participant of one certain kind of business can own and can hold their data, their privacy, and they will have a so-called of collective governance inside the whole value chain. And so it's kind of a revolution inside our digital world. And actually, there's a saying in China that called data is the new oil, new energy for the future. So you can see that there actually lots of companies, they would like to acquire the data from consumers and from producers of data by money, and mostly take it for free. So that is partly people and previously companies globally are doing now. And in the blockchain world, the data will be not acquired free from those our data producers, our data owners, that will be charged by some certain kind of coins or cryptocurrencies by us. So it's a new ecosystem for our internet world. And let's go to ledger. It means it's quite a accounting world, ledger. It means that there will be some kind of accountant, they will record different kind of event or a trading record on a book. It's a traditionally accountant do. But in a blockchain world, in a blockchain context that everyone will be accountant to register and to record some kind of event, trading or registration of some kind of asset or some ownership. So it means that the ownership and the activity of the economy world and the finance world will be distributed into every individual. So it's kind of a new revolution for decentralization. So, and now, I think the most important thing for blockchain is that it's kind of new social contract. Yeah, actually, previously and currently, social contract is signed between people and company, people and government, and people with other bureaucratical hierarchy organizations, government or companies also, and organizations also. But in the future, by blockchain, everyone will be equal in a digital world. So it is actually the essence of your President Lincoln once said in the Gettysburg speech called a government of the people, a government by the people, and a government of the people. It's a new social contract. That's very interesting. So let's go to the next question is the job or the career needed for blockchain plus energy sectors. The first I want to say is that hard skill is very important. Hard skill includes 3 sectors in blockchain plus energy sectors. First one is a very solid knowledge and the skills in energy sectors, whether in generation or distribution or transmission or consumption of energy. And whether in solar, wind, and the electric vehicle and energy storage or biomass and hydrogen, skill, the hard skill is very important and it is essential. And another thing is essential understanding about computer science, especially programming, especially coding. And previously, people always thinking that programming and the coding is very complicated. But at this time, at this age, programming is very much easier for young people. It's just like a daily talk, a dialogue. You can just use your, what we call natural language to write some program. It is very easy. So it is to that put off your fear about programming and coding and to embrace the computer science. And try to learn how to program from the start. It's very easy. And and the third thing, the third hard skill will be some certain kind of understanding about finance. In the future, a future talent of we call the fintech area should learn something about how to help those people raise funds from different kind of financial instruments, bonds, securities, and other instruments. For example, the equity market and other directive and indirective instruments. And beside the hard skills or hard knowledge set, and I think the soft skill is much more important. And for example, previously in China, energy one average energy professionals that graduate from energy college or energy universities with engineering degree and works for huge energy companies, whether state-owned or whether private, for about 20 years. And specialized in one very narrow and specialized areas, for example, design for one certain part of the power plant or one certain part of a very huge long-distance transmission grid. So this is the past. This is not the future. In the future, that people and talent should possess. He should very context and semantic savvy. It means that he should not only focus on the energy industry itself, but should look outside of the industry and look into other interesting companies, especially in the technology area, for example, Google, to learn how these companies, how these ambitious teams the way they solve problems, the way they train their members, the way they deliver their purpose. So this is very important, especially in a fast changing and evolving environment of the energy now. And secondly, for the soft skill, I think is bilingual. There's some kind of anti-globalization trend in some countries, in some developing countries. But in our developing countries, globalization is always the key trend, the mainstream trend, not only in the past, but also in the future. So bilingual, it means that you will have a language and you will know how to communicate with different countries in a working language. English or German or Japanese, both okay. But you have to possess some kind of the second language, the second working language. For example, in a blockchain areas, it is very interesting that our company has about 30 staff, and among those 30 staffs, there are 10 foreigners, 1 Japanese, and 3 Korean, and the other 6 are United States citizens located in San Francisco and New York. So the common working language in our lab, in our company, is English. So this is not this is a very common situation in blockchain industry, and as well as in other technology-focused industry. So a professional in the energy in the future should have a very good skill of English or other global common working languages. So this is one hard skills: computer science, energy skills, and finance knowledge. And the second is soft skills: communication skills, semantic savvy, and the context savvy. And the second is bilingual. This is several points I would like to raise to every participant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kao. I think it has been very clear the new world that is unfolding in front of us and the type of skills that we need to respond and to take advantage. But you mentioned something very important at the beginning about a new, you mentioned a revolution and you mentioned also a new social contract. And we have here a representative from the workers, from the trade unions. The trade unions in the Philippines and around the world are taking the issue of the just transition also in a very dialogue way. Is that true that we are under a new social contract here? Do we have enough dialogue to advance the clean energy transition in a just way?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Cristina. Actually, we have very little dialogue going on regarding the decent and clean energy or just energy transition issue, except for tripartite meetings hosted by ILO. So I think this is one area where we have to do much more work in the future. I have a couple of points I would like to make on behalf of the Trade Union Congress of the Philippines. May I first say that we support the goals of decent jobs and inclusive growth through the implementation of a just transition. For us, this means observance of international, especially core labor standards, with emphasis on freedom of association and collective bargaining. Number 2, employment creation and just remuneration with profit-sharing schemes. Third, social protection and decent working conditions. And 4th, social dialogue and workers' participation in decision-making. Essentially, these are the points also mentioned in the just transition guidelines of the ILO. The second major point I'd like to make is that to be truly inclusive, we must address the concerns of workers in the informal economy, not just those in the formal sector. Informal workers account for 70% of all workers as well as the overwhelming majority of poor Filipinos. I think this 70% figure is about the same for almost all countries in Asia, except maybe Singapore and the more developed countries. These informal workers would include farmers, fisherfolk, indigenous peoples, artisans, vendors, small businessmen, and other self-employed persons. It would also include workers under contract or informal working arrangements. The third major point is that the challenge before us is how to mobilize the entire labor sector, formal and informal, without whom we cannot achieve the goals I talked about. Decent jobs and the transition to cleaner energy in a just way. For us, this would require, number one, establishing or strengthening their unions, associations, cooperatives, MSMEs, and the like. Number two, providing a real stake. This would include secure land tenure, co-ownership schemes, job security, and so on, markets, technology, skills, and credit. And priority activities would include reforestation, including agroforestry and watershed protection. These should be counted as clean energy jobs, not just those working in specialized companies. So I support very much the statement of Senator Legarda earlier that housewives that go into waste recycling and so on, they should be considered jobs and counted in addition to the 8 million figure that was mentioned earlier. And most of those 8 million are I think, in China. Yeah. Number two, coastal resources protection and regeneration, mangroves, deforestation, coral reef regeneration, and so on. Number three, reducing or utilizing bio-wastes through recycling of water, organic and urban agriculture, biogas generation, and so on. The list is quite long. And the last point that we'd like to make, Cristina, is that we must customize clean energy programs to fit the needs and conditions of rural workers. Solar and wind-powered irrigation, mini hydro systems, machinery, drying and processing equipment, transport workers, electric vehicles. I've been in touch with tricycle drivers in Bayumbong, Coron, Palawan, and they tell me that there is no model that should be imposed for all types of conditions. In Coron, Palawan, which is also a very tourist oriented area, they have very steep areas, and they want to make sure that the engines provided for electric tricycles can really go up this steep hillsides. Otherwise, even if you provide e-vehicles on easy turns, I don't think that it will be acceptable to those vehicle owners. And also, I'd like to add urban poor, housing, using indigenous materials, taking advantage of irrigation, and so on. You can create a lot of jobs using bamboo, and so on. And those are the main points I'd like to make. Cristina, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Montemayor. Please, thank you. As you can see, the different groups, and that's why the tripartite constituents of the ILO is so important. The voices also from the workers' side. But let me now go to our last but not least speaker, and I deliberately left Professor Perera to the end because the session is about jobs and skills and entrepreneurship skills, and your academic career is long and very successful. Are universities, let me ask you, are universities or Tibet institutions producing the type of skills that are needed for blockchain? And if not, how long is going to take to integrate the skills that Mr. Kao needs for his company to grow into the curriculum so that we see the new graduates going to Mr. Kao before he retires?
much. Good morning, everyone. Cristina. Yes, before I go to your question directly, I think it's fair for the audience to brief place what Sri Lanka's the goals of jobs. You know, Sri Lanka is a 65,000 square kilometer country with 22 million people. When it comes to jobs, the state sector jobs are about 1.4 million. And then we have the private sector. And our economy was open to the global markets in 1977. Ever since then, we had to adjust to, Group 10 or whatever these things to produce or address the labor market demands locally, regionally, as well as internationally. And we are a country which is famous for our tea, #1 export and the income earner, foreign income, and rubber and the coconut. And as of late, it's more importantly the apparel sector, which has lots of jobs, needs clean, just environments. And depending on the national goals, number of jobs, types of industries, all depend on the national goals, the macroeconomics goals for the development goals. So when it comes to the national policies on having identified the types of jobs required to achieve the national development goals, the education comes next. Without creating a human capital, and just because you have a human capital and if they are not aware of the green energy policies or green technologies or implementing these green technologies, policies, is not going to make any difference. With the ILO recommendations in 2003, Sri Lanka has just started to introduce a technology stream. We take about 25,000 students to our universities, state universities, and out of this last year, having introduced the technology stream, we took 1,800 out of 25,000 to the state universities, created a different technology stream, which addresses all these green, clean technologies. So that is how we are trying to create the highest academic accolades in the state sector. Taking on this one, we have in my own university, in the Faculty of Engineering, we have about 60 odd postgraduate programs where energy is the priority. And if you take the country, you can't talk about any just or good environments, decent job skills without the sustainable energy supply. And if I tell you, 99% of the country households are electrified through the national grid. And this 3,000, close to 4,000 megawatts installed capacity, we have only 900 megawatts of coal that is present. And the targets of 2020, 2030, 2050, very, very ambitious. 2050, I learned yesterday, you can't go 100% renewable. It's 80 or 90 from the German and Indian experience. So nevertheless, the households, about 5 million households, are all electrified and they have access to electricity and reliable. And to promote the energy conservation in addition to the generation investment, the transmission and the distribution investment, energy conservation part, the investment, national investment for 2020, 2023, even in the long term, it's a must. And it's a significant percentage by the country. So itself, Senator talks about the CFLs and the Ceylon Electricity Board and the Sustainable Energy Authority, leading from the government. The initiatives are there to not only through the tariff to conserve energy, but also there are schemes to provide access to renewable energies by facilitating, subsidizing the renewable energies, green technologies. And if you take the postgraduate programs, the green technologies of construction, the strict regulations, the environmental programs, urban development planning, then building services engineering, all postgraduate level programs are there to talk about the green, clean, and assess through research work, research and development on life cycle energy analysis of different industries in Sri Lanka that is to be compared with the world. So that type of education at the postgraduate and undergraduate level. Then comes to the TVET sector, Tertiary and Vocational the Education Commission, which is under the Ministry of Youth and Skills Development. There's a dedicated ministry created way back in 1994, if I remember correct, Ministry of Youth and Skills Development, where the ADB had come handily to produce these skill sets for the tertiary and vocational education sector, creating a Tertiary and Vocational Education Commission, or the TVEC, where you have the national vocational qualifications studied in 2007, where I was also part of this one, studying the world trends, and we have national vocational qualifications from level 1 to level 7. And all that is there in the TVET sector, Vocational Training Authority, and all types of skills. And also we have the environment, the ministry. This current His Excellency the President, he himself took charge of the environmental ministry, and where the selected industries, targeted industries, even state or otherwise, comes under the scrutiny of the Central Environment Authority. Dr. Priyatha Vijaytunga, who was seated next to me, he was instrumental in bringing this, the world, the international protocols on the climate change, all kinds of things, and that level is there. And the school curriculum, if you take, the students are taught about the green, clean, sustainable energies that are there. So from the kindergarten to the highest level, from the tertiary and vocational to the universities, the curriculum itself is enriched through this creation of knowledge.
Thank you very much. I think in Sri Lanka, certainly they can respond to your needs, so you should be talking to each other. Please join me to thank you also, Professor Perera. So now we are going to change a little bit the program because we don't want to miss any of your contributions. And what I propose is that we go right away to the working groups. The coffee is outside. I'm sure that you know where it is. You just can have a quick one and come back. But we are going to work in groups, and the panel here has key questions for the groups. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists for a question that is going to be addressed in your groups, and hold on to your questions or your comments, because we will be building on that through the working groups. The chairs are built in a smart way. If we change the first row, we just have the working group ready. So it's all ready to go. Allow me to start with the first question, and then I pass to the panelists. So my question will be, the public authorities often encourage green initiatives, but the private sector also is a big green innovator. What do green entrepreneurs look for when investing? Can smaller investors also drive green projects? So that is one question that one working group could take. Should we start for Mr. Cow? Mr. Cow, your question, please.
Okay, so could you handle the question?
Yes, my question, but it's not a question to you, is this is the time of the questions for the groups. Yes. So you can, have you prepared any question for the working groups?
So next we will have a working group and discuss this project, and then we will have some kind of report. Yeah. I think that there's a lot of challenges ahead of entrepreneurship. And firstly, I was an entrepreneur. And before my entrepreneurship, I worked for government of China, and Energy Bureau, that is the Department for Energy Policies. And between the civil servant job and the entrepreneur job, I found that there's kind of lack of communication between government and especially the entrepreneur in the startups. So the question I would like to pose and raise is that what is the best way for government to reach those emerging companies and emerging entrepreneurs and emerging social entrepreneurs? And what is the best way for entrepreneurs and for those potential entrepreneurs to deliver their ideas and deliver their purpose to government organizations, or to government regulatory bodies, or other organizations, or some kind of bodies that are in charge of the industry regulation and the industry policies.
Thank you very much. Important questions. So, Mr. Dupont, I know that you have to go to another panel, so do you want to pose a question as final remark?
No, I'd actually like to have an advertisement for session 6. This is a smart news board, or a bizarre knowledge and fun knowledge. Session 6 is on business models and job creation from renewable power deployment. And the session chair happens to be here, Jeffrey Humber. Would you mind standing up from USAID? And it's going to be quite interesting. It will cover a number of different topics, such as creating employment in rooftop solar, how the renewable sector can provide jobs for poverty reduction, and then the best acronym ever is called IJEDI, which is the International Jobs and Economic Development Impacts Model, and a presentation on school renewable energy applications to improve education in Sumba, Indonesia, and a presentation from, I think there's someone from Okra Solar here, on pay-as-you-go isn't disruptive yet, the real potential of pay-as-you-go technology. I'll just leave you with that. I think it's a really nice segue from the discussion you're having, and I apologize, I have to go to another panel. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Peter. Senator Legarda, do you want to pose a question to the working group?
I wish I was not a senator and I could attend all the sessions and just learn. But anyway, our forum today has brought a lot of convergence points and also a lot of issues where we can go the way forward. For example, former Congressman Montemayor, of course we will meet after this, Leonie, because much of the things that he mentioned are issues close to my heart, and we've already enacted policy, and we're actually already funding projects in that direction. For example, Leonie, you mentioned about jobs in coral restoration. We've actually provided 500 million pesos for the UP Marine Science Institute and the local governments of Antique and Camiguin for coral restoration program, where divers and the local community can improve the corals in their areas. I'm not sure of the technology they use, because the UST and other agencies of government have different technologies when it comes to coral rehabilitation. Another is something as simple as providing assistance to our indigenous weavers. I know that may not be clean energy directly, but it's a clean job that helps indigenous people, that addresses the issues of rural livelihoods, of women empowerment, and indigenous people. Because I think you didn't mention weavers, but you mentioned about jobs for indigenous people. And artisans, correct, because I've been doing that for 20 years, where we actually help our indigenous peoples through their crafts. Artisans are weavers, be it the Ifugaos in the Cordillera, or the weavers of Antique in Panay, or the weavers of Lake Cebu in South Cotabato. So together with the National Commission on Culture, that's something we do, as I would say we, the Philippine government, my office, and I as chairman of the Committee on Finance. So there's so much convergence we could do here, and I'm just talking about Yoni. And Mr. Dupont here was talking about jobs that can be generated through solar rooftops and other. Just on a side note, my son is one of the entrepreneurs involved in solar rooftops at Solar Philippines. Again, you made an advertisement, I'm giving an advertisement. And he actually built the biggest solar farm in the island of Luzon, and that's in Calatagan, Batangas. And the first and only Philippine manufacturer of solar panels. Unfortunately, he is not here. He doesn't even know this conference is here today. I don't think they were invited, but that's not beside the point. That's beside the point. All I'm saying is that, yes, solar rooftops, I've seen it. Because Solar Calatagan, the 63.3 megawatts that the young boy has built when he was 21 years old, and it made it to the feed-in tariff, and it's the biggest solar power plant in the island of Luzon, generated 4,000 jobs, not only in Calatagan municipality, but in the neighboring towns of Western Batangas. And I saw it was like the gold rush. And I would visit him during construction. There were tricycles, motorcycles, people were walking on foot, and suddenly there were cafeterias and women were feeding the men, and so green jobs were generated in a span of 6 months. It was a plantation of some mango trees, but really an arable land, 100 hectares. 80 hectares of which was converted to a solar farm, and 4,000 jobs were generated, all local employment. No foreign EPC. I'm proud of that. Not that the foreign EPCs are bad, but local contractor, local labor, Filipino engineers. At the time, it was still imported panels and inverters from, I'm not sure, Germany, I think, and China. But now, he already started to build last year Philippine-made solar panels, competing with China for export. Sorry, you're from China. Yes, that's good. So, collaboration, correct. No, but it's actually Taiwanese technology, but Philippine labor and assembly. All I'm saying is that these are areas of convergence. I'm the mother, I'm not the entrepreneur, and I'm not the engineer, but I just wanted to work closely with Yoni for the green jobs in every aspect, whether it's for corals or for artisans, or for digging esteros and canals, which we need, which, I know I'm not. Dole Kabuhayan, the Department of Labor does that in their Tupad program. So you should have gotten the director head of the Department of Labor, because they do green jobs under Dole Kabuhayan and Dole Tupad. So I'm just talking too much. It's just that there's so many areas of convergence, and I'd like to thank you for having me here.
Thank you very much. I think you put the stress in the green rush, no gold rush, but green rush. Montemayor, Mr. Montemayor, final remark, question? Do you have any final question for the working groups?
Mine would tend to be a general question, Cristina. I'm really after the effective participation of the general public in issues relating to the workshop topic that we have. So I guess depending on your line of expertise, or if you're just a person with a general interest in the issue, the question really is, how can we encourage greater involvement and participation of the citizenry in the issues relating to a just energy transition?
Thank you very much. Professor Perera, final question.
Yes, I think we need to understand in different countries' perspective, keeping in line with the global developments when it comes to these jobs, what skills that are required to ensure greening the energy, and then how to classify them and how to implement them effectively.
Okay, very clear question. Allow me to call the chairs of the working groups. Could you please stand up? The chairs of working groups, so we have two, and you as well. So you can see the chairs now. So they are going to be in a different area with one of the flip charts, and we start the conversation right now with